This is Mystery Port Chronicles. I am Nathaniel Aldridge, a man who watches, listens, and records. Here, in the fog and lamplight of the port, every small sign is a testament. I follow them, Evelyn writes them down, and together we bring truth to light. Let us begin. The sea does not bargain. It takes what it wants, and occasionally it gives something back. But what it returned on that Tuesday morning, no one in the port wanted to see. The fog was thick that day. Not the gentle mist that heralds the morning, but a wall of gray wool that muffled the cries of the gulls. I was standing near the customs house, adjusting my watch, when the shape materialized. It was a schooner, the Grey Gull, a fishing vessel known for its sturdy crew and reliable hauls. But she didn't sail into the harbor. She drifted. Her sails were ragged, flapping uselessly in the dead wind. Her wheel turned aimlessly, guided only by the pull of the tide. And she was silent. There is a specific kind of silence that belongs to the dead. It is heavier than sleep. Evelyn Hart stood beside me. She had been tracking the arrival times of the merchant fleet. She lowered her notebook, her eyes narrowing against the mist. "Nathaniel, look at the waterline. She's riding high. Too high, which means her hold is empty. And the deck," Evelyn pressed, her voice barely a whisper. "Where is the crew?" That was the question that froze the blood of the dock workers. The Grey Gull bumped gently against Pier 4 with a hollow thud. No ropes were thrown, no shouts of greeting, just the creak of timber and the sway of an empty ship. Evelyn quietly opened her notebook. She always recorded her own part in the Chronicle. "I'm Evelyn Hart. I write what he sees and ask what he cannot ask." And on that morning, the silence asked the loudest question of all. We boarded the vessel first. The harbor master was too superstitious to set foot on what he already called a cursed tomb. The deck was wet, slick with the morning dew. Coils of rope lay neatly stacked, not in the chaos of a struggle, but with the precision of a disciplined crew. I walked toward the mess table set up on the middeck, sheltered by a canvas awning. The scene was domestic, disturbingly so. 6 tin plates, 6 mugs of coffee. I touched the side of a mug. "Stone cold," I observed, "but look at the surface." "No mold, no evaporation ring," Evelyn confirmed, her gaze sharp. "Exactly," I affirmed. "This coffee was poured this morning, perhaps 3 hours ago." 6 men sat down to eat, and then they didn't. I looked at the plates, half-eaten biscuits, a spoon resting in a bowl of porridge, as if the eater had paused mid-bite to listen to something. Whatever took the crew of the Grey Gull hadn't fought them. It had interrupted them. "Nathaniel, smell this," Evelyn directed, moving toward the hatch leading to the cargo hold. The sea air usually smells of salt, brine, and tar, but here, cutting through the freshness, was something sharp, acrid, like a match struck in a small room. "Sulfur," I stated. "And something else underneath it. Rotting fish. But the hold is empty," she noted, looking at the clean, dry planks. "Curious. A fishing boat with no fish, smelling of hellfire, abandoned in the middle of a meal." We moved toward the captain's cabin at the stern. Captain Elias Thorne was a man of strict habit and unflappable temperament. I knew him casually. He was a man who kept his logs precise and his boots polished. The cabin door, surprisingly, was unlocked. Inside, the order was unnerving.
Every object was in its proper place. The bunk was tightly made, the charts were neatly rolled and tied with twine, and his small brass barometer shone as if recently polished. A cold, damp chill permeated the room, carrying the pervasive odor of seawater and old canvas. But as I moved deeper into the space, the anomalies began to mount. The captain's heavy leather sea boots were sitting precisely side by side near the door. The leather was dry, suggesting they had not been worn for hours. If Captain Thorne had abandoned his ship, the first thing he would have secured was his footwear. He had left in his socks, an act of unthinking panic or extreme haste. I turned to the desk. The logbook lay open, held down by a smooth, sea-worn stone. I leaned over the pages, withdrawing my small bronze magnifying glass to examine the final entry. Evelyn, read the time and pay attention to the style. She read softly. 0400 hours. Sea calm. Visibility poor. The light. The light is wrong. It calls to us. The handwriting changes, I pointed out, tracing the ink with my pen's tip. The beginning is firm, characteristic of Thorne's discipline. The last sentence is shaky, disjointed, spasmodic. A struggle? Evelyn asked. Physical distress? Panic, certainly, I replied. But the last thought wasn't of danger to the ship, but of the light being wrong. This suggests a visual rather than a material threat. Panic or poison. The most telling clue, however, lay just outside the cabin door, housed in its wooden stand, the binnacle. A ship is blind without its compass. I watched the needle. It should have been pointed slightly east of north, compensating for the local magnetic deviation. Instead, it drifted lazily before snapping hard to the west, then settling into a position that defied nautical physics. I pulled my own pocket compass from my vest. Mine pointed true. The ship's compass pointed to a lie. I crouched, running my fingers along the bottom of the binnacle casing, feeling for anything that might disrupt the delicate balance of the magnetized needle. There was a slight, almost imperceptible drag on the wood near the floor. A foreign body. Someone tampered with the eyes of the ship, I concluded, rising slowly. The air in the cabin, though orderly, felt suffocating. They didn't just want them lost at sea. They wanted them to believe they were sailing directly into madness. Evelyn, ever the pragmatist, immediately looked for the means of escape. The Grey Gull carried 2 lifeboats stored on davits. Both were gone. The ropes had been cut, not carefully untied. The frayed ends danced in the wind, like streamers marking a sudden, desperate departure. "They left in a hurry, Nathaniel. They cut the boats loose," she said, her voice betraying a hint of urgency. 6 men, experienced sailors. Panic usually makes men freeze or fight, I countered, adjusting my collar. To coordinate launching 2 boats takes agreement, a shared moment of absolute certainty. Shared hallucination? Mass hysteria? She suggested, looking out at the featureless fog. Or a shared, overwhelming threat, I said, something they could see or smell that made the open sea seem safer than this deck. I walked to the rail where the boats had been launched. I ran a gloved finger along the wood, examining the residue left by the sudden friction of the ropes. There was a fine yellowish powder clinging to the grain. I collected a small sample. "Sulfur again," I announced, and traces of phosphorus. "Phosphorus, that glows in the dark," Evelyn noted, a flicker of cold comprehension in her eyes. "Precisely," I agreed. In the crushing embrace of the fog, coated on a mast or a sail, or perhaps smeared across the portholes, it would not be fire. It would look like a spectre. We needed to understand the crew, not just the ship's mechanics. The physical clues led to the means of their disappearance. The human clues would lead to the motive. This was Evelyn's domain. She went to the Anchor and Chain, the public house where the sailors' families often gathered for news and solace. She found Sarah Thorne, the captain's wife, huddled alone in a quiet corner, clutching a handkerchief like a lifeline. Evelyn approached with the quiet deference that always managed to open the tightest lips. "Mrs. Thorne," Evelyn began, her voice low and empathetic, "my name is Evelyn Hart. I am working with Mr. Aldridge on your husband's case. I promise you, we are not looking for ghosts." Sarah Thorne's eyes were bloodshot, weary from weeping. "They all say the sea wraith took him, that Elias was reckless." "I know Captain Thorne was anything but reckless," Evelyn assured her. "His logbook speaks of discipline. Did Elias speak of anything unusual before this trip, anything at all that troubled him, save for the general worries of the sea?" The widow hesitated, nervously twisting the fabric in her hands. He was worried, Miss Hart. Not about the sea itself, about the competition. The market has been cruel, and Elias was too successful." "Who was the source of his distress?" Evelyn inquired gently. "Barnaby Rourke." She whispered the name, heavy with resentment. "He runs the trawlers out of the East Dock. He used to be an associate, but Elias surpassed him. He was losing money to Elias's efficiency. Rourke hated him for it. He told Elias that the Grey Gull was fishing in cursed waters. He said the sea wraith had been seen there, just waiting." The sea wraith. I allowed a moment of silence for the weight of the legend. A local superstition, surely. "A ghost ship that glows green and smells of the grave," the widow recounted, her voice shaking. "Rourke was mocking him, but Elias grew worried. Rourke said if Elias went out again, the wraith would finally claim them all." I watched her closely, noting the subtle shift from grief to righteous anger. The wraith was a common legend, but Rourke's highly specific description, the green glow, the odor, was the key. He had used the legend as a weapon. Evelyn stood up, giving Mrs. Thorne a brief, reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. The widow had given us more than just a name. She had given us the narrative. Barnaby Rourke, a man losing money to Captain Thorne's efficiency. Evelyn returned to me at the office, her eyes bright with discovery. "It's a psychological game, Nathaniel," she summarized, placing her notes on my desk. "Rourke planted the seed of fear before they even left port. He wasn't relying on a ghost, he was relying on human fear to do his dirty work." "And then he staged the play," I finished, a grim satisfaction settling over my features. The pieces of the mechanism were now clear. Only the hand that turned the crank remained to be exposed.
"Evelyn, hold the lantern steady near the binnacle housing," I instructed.
We returned to
There,
the ship
crimson
that evening.
tar-soaked cloth was a
I
bar
needed to
line.
test my hypothesis about the compass deviation, the sulfur, and the phosphorus. I brought a strong magnet and a lantern. "Evelyn, hold the lantern steady near the binnacle housing," I instructed. I inspected the underside of the compass stand. There, taped crudely with tar-soaked cloth, was a bar of iron. Simple, crude, effective. It pulled the needle 15 degrees off course. They thought they were heading north, toward the fishing grounds,
But this magnet pulled them west, straight toward the jagged shoals Rourke called the Cursed Waters. "And once they were there?" I inquired. "The final act, the smell. We found canisters in the ventilation shafts of the hold," I said, producing the small metal tin I had recovered. It contained a mixture of sulfur and chemical salts. When heated by the ship's boiler pipes, it released a dense, terrifying yellow smoke, a noxious, choking vapor. "They didn't see a ghost, Evelyn. They were gassed, disoriented, coughing, eyes burning," I concluded. "And then they saw the glowing rigging?" Evelyn whispered, connecting the final piece. "The logic broke. They abandoned ship because the ship itself became a monster in their eyes." We found Barnaby Rourke at his warehouse. He was overseeing the unloading of a meager catch, his face clouded with ill temper. He was a large man, with hands that appeared stained by long hours of rough labor, or so it seemed. I approached him directly. "Mr. Rourke, a tragedy about the Grey Gull." "Aye," he said gruffly. "The sea is cruel. I warned Eloius about those waters." "You did. You were very specific about the green glow of the Wraith." "Legends are old for a reason, Mr. Aldridge." "Indeed," I replied, my gaze fixed on his hands. "But phosphorus paint is a modern invention, and it leaves stains that are very hard to wash off." Rourke froze, shoving his hands into his pockets, but I had already seen it. Under the grime of his fingernails, a faint, telltale luminescence. "We found the magnet, Mr. Rourke, and the canisters," Evelyn stated firmly, stepping into the light. "The police are dusting them for prints now, but your hands have already confessed."
Rourke didn't run. He leaned heavily against a stack of crates, defeated. "I didn't mean for them to die," he confessed, his voice thick with sudden fear. I wanted the ship. I wanted them to abandon it so I could claim it as salvage." "Where are they, Rourke?" Evelyn demanded. "They took the boats. The current in those shoals, it's strong. It pulls out to the open ocean," he mumbled, refusing to meet our eyes. "You sent 6 men into the void for the price of a hull," I stated simply. "It was business, just business," he cried out in protest. "Murder is never business. It is the theft of a future."
The Coast Guard swept the waters for 3 days. They found one lifeboat, empty, splintered. The other was never seen. Captain Elias Thorne and his 5 crewmen were gone, not taken by ghosts, but by greed. Barnaby Rourke was arrested. The charge was piracy and manslaughter, but as they led him away, he looked less like a villain and more like a man who had stared too long into the fog and become part of it. Evelyn stood on the dock with Sarah Thorne. She had no words to fix the silence, so she just held the widow's hand. "At least," Sarah whispered, "at least I know he wasn't crazy. He didn't leave me. He was taken." "He was a captain until the end, Sarah," Evelyn assured her. Back in our office, the fire was dying down. The case of the silent schooner was closed, but the cold remained. Evelyn opened the case file. Her pen hovered over the final page. "What shall we call this one?" she asked me. "The Silent Schooner," I replied. Evelyn wrote, "Case file 003, Resolved. Leçon. The most terrifying monsters are not the ones that haunt the sea, but the ones we construct to frighten our brothers. Fear is a poison, but greed is the hand that pours it. I watched the smoke rise from my pipe. A bit poetic, Evelyn, she said. Someone has to be, Nathaniel. You only care about magnets. Magnets don't lie. People do. And that is why you need me, she finished, looking up at me with that knowing, steady gaze. Perhaps, I conceded.
Case file 003 is closed. But in the fog of Mystery Port, another lantern always waits to be lit.